Let's come back to relationships because this is an important one, as you stated, and talk about the relationship we have with our significant other in life and how we go about facilitating a healthy relationship. Whether it be somebody who hasn't found that relationship yet or somebody that's in a relationship, what is it we're looking for as a partner to be in that relationship and to provide, a foundation for happiness? And then what are we looking for from our partner?
Yeah. One of the greatest enemies of healthy relationships and of happiness in general is false expectations. If, for example, if my expectation, let's look at the individual before we go to the relationship. If my expectation is that if I study the science of happiness and become an expert in it, then I will live happily ever after. Experience a constant high. Well, that's false expectation, and I'm bound to be disappointed, frustrated, in fact, unhappy. The foundation of happiness is first and foremost allowing in unhappiness. Because as I mentioned, when we reject painful emotions, these emotions only intensify. So that's on the individual level. On the interpersonal level, when my expectation is that we fall in love, we commit to one another, and then we live happily ever after, just like they do in the movies, it seems. That's false expectations, and that is an automatic, an inevitable path to unhappiness in the relationship. Even in the best of relationships, in the greatest love stories, there are difficulties and challenges and hardships. And these challenges and difficulties and hardships are actually potentially a window to growth, to development, to more intimacy, to greater love. And the sooner we can accept that, embrace that fact, the better off we are. And I'll just share some work by the late David Schnarch. David Schnarch was a relationship expert psychologist who whose work, especially, and I'll recommend here his book, Passionate Marriage, has transformed many relationships, including my own, for the better. And he talks there about gridlocks. What are gridlocks? Gridlocks are conflicts within a relationship, but it's not like a regular conflict where you fight, you make up, you make love, and then all is well again. Gridlocks are serious, um, deep-rooted conflicts around something that is very important to both partners. Usually, gridlocks revolve around one of four um, topics. One of them can be money. What do we spend it on? How much do we save? Do we save enough? So one is the money. The second common topic for a gridlock, for this real deep conflict, is children, specifically their education. How do we raise them? Are we too lenient? Are we too harsh? What school do we send them to? What do we get them? What do we not get them? And on and on. So around children. The third is around sex. What kind of sex? How much sex? This is too rough. This is too vanilla. Is it a monogamous relationship? Do we open it? And this could obviously lead to a gridlock. And finally, the fourth um, topic is extended family, or if you want to be even more specific, in-laws. How often do we see them? Do we see them at all? And so on. And when you have a gridlock around one of these four areas, and there may be others, but these are the most common, what happens then is that you're at a crossroad within the relationship. And by the way, the first gridlock usually happens 3 or 4 years after after the relationship has started, meaning after the honeymoon phase is over. And when you have a gridlock, it usually comes with a shocking realization, which is, wow, I can't believe we disagree on something that is so fundamental. Maybe we were not meant to be together as I thought we were. Because if we were meant to be together, we couldn't be in this in this deep, value-based disagreement. And then there are essentially three options when you get to the gridlock. And the important point here is that gridlock is inevitable. In the best of relationships, it happens. It can happen after 2 years, it can happen after five, but it happens. And when it happens, there are three choices. One, you leave, you end the relationship. This is why you see such a peak in relationships ending between 4 and 7 years, because that's when they experience their first gridlock and come to the conclusion that they're not meant to be together as they thought they were. So one is leaving the relationship, exit. Second is staying together, but not really being together. Staying together because of conveniences, because you have children, or because of religion, or because of money, or because you don't think there is a better option out there. It doesn't matter, but you stay together, but you're not really together. You drift apart within your relationship. Option number two. Option number three is you battle it out. You have the conflict. It's painful. You go through it. You disagree. And ultimately could be after a month, it could be after 6 months, you emerge on the other side of the storm and you emerge stronger. Your relationship emerges stronger, more intimate, more compassionate, and more passionate as a result of this gridlock. But it takes work and it takes effort. Now, my wife and I, we'd been together for a very long time. In fact, we were, high school sweethearts, and I remember our first gridlock. I must say, shocking, because how could it be? I thought, she was the love of my life. How could we disagree around something so fundamental? And our first gridlock was around education. How can we see so differently? These are people we love more than anything else in the world. How could she not see what I see? And she thought the same thing about me, of course. And we had a real gridlock, and we were both up in arms. And then I came across Schnarch's book, Passionate Marriage, and just reading that gridlock is inevitable. In other words, reading that there is nothing wrong with us or with our relationship, that it's simply taking its normal, regular course. That was such a relief. And in part, at least, enabled us to go through that gridlock in painful, because it's always painful, but in a relatively healthy manner. And we've had a few gridlocks since. We've been together for a long time. And yet today it's a lot easier, not easy, but easier to go through them because, we've been there, done that. We know, okay, now we're fighting, now we're disagreeing. That too shall pass, and we'll grow closer, more intimate as a result of it. So, there is something that is very, that leads to a relief, in a sense, that, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to struggle. It's natural. It's part of the evolution of any relationship.
But knowing about these gridlocks, is that enough? Picturing somebody right now who is in one of these, and you said they can last up to 6 months, like for somebody again who's listening or watching and they're like, okay, let's say finances, we're not, seeing eye to eye with the way we want to save money. To me, it seems like because these are such fundamental, arguments or disagreements, somebody's going to have to compromise. Like
Mm.
how if we're in this gridlock and it is so important to both people, how do we begin to, back away and pull the tentacles back and without somebody totally compromising? How
Yeah.
does that work?
Yeah. Look, sometimes there are such the gap in terms of values is wide, and sometimes we're just not meant to be together. Sometimes, in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, in most gridlocks, not only are they solvable, they are the road to deeper intimacy, a better relationship, and a stronger individual. How does that come about? It comes about because until the gridlock happens, um, during the honeymoon phase, you don't. stand on your back feet. You compromise, or you give up, or you say, "Oh, that's so cute," and you move on. But when the gridlock happens, is when you're no longer willing to compromise in that way. You're no longer willing to look the other way, and then you clash. And what happens ultimately is that you come to an agreement that both of you are happy with. And yes, it could be a compromise on one side versus the other. It could be a semi-compromise on both sides, or it could be a third path that is actually better for both. I'll give you again a very specific example from our very first gridlock in terms of education. My wife was a lot more free and easy with the children. Let them roll, let them just do their thing, evolve, grow up naturally, in a sense. And for me, it was much more about boundaries, and they have to study this and do this and eat this. And today, again, we're far from perfect, and we're still evolving and learning every single day about what it means to raise children. But today we've both come a long way in that I realized that I shouldn't be controlling what my children eat. That was certainly unhealthy and unhelpful in the long term. At the same time, my wife has come in my direction, realizing that yeah, we should be concerned about what they put in their mouths. Certainly we're not feeding them junk food just because they want it all the time. So we have come to what we think is a healthy middle path. And when I say middle path, it doesn't mean, okay, I gave up 50% and she gave up 50%. A path that is somewhere in between the two extremes that we represented, that we think is healthy. And over time, our children also teach us what is the healthy or beneficial or most helpful path. But that is just, this is part of experimenting with truth. And when we realize that we're experimenting with truths together, when we said we're holding on to what we believe, because I do think children need to eat healthy food, and I do think boundaries are important in raising children. So at the same time, I'm experimenting, and my wife is experimenting with new ways of being and new ways of doing things, of parenting, for example. Experiments with truth, not finding truth.
And just to give us a little more context on that example about the boundaries and the kids, how old were the kids at that time?
Well, when we had our first gridlock around kids, our first son, who's now almost 17, was just born. And what kind of food do we let him? How do we feed him? A bit later on, what boundaries do we put on his behavior? I mean, there were many conflicts around that.
My question for you now is, because you've explained there's these four major gridlocks, knowing that ahead of time before we get into a gridlock, is there work we can do as a couple in those areas? Like maybe we decide we're going to set this day aside and get into finances and really hash it out and share our thinking and philosophies around that and go into each of those to try and prevent a more serious problem down the line.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I need to think about it some more, which I will. What I think we can do, rather than preparing particularly for each one or any one of these areas, is create a healthy soil where we can flourish. In other words, create certain conditions in place that will help us when we inevitably experience gridlock. Because no matter what preparation we do, no matter how much we know, no matter how many times we read and reread Schnarch's book, gridlocks will find us. They will find the relationship. They'll be there. But the way we can create conditions so that we can deal with them better when they do come is, for example, um, communicate and communicate openly. This is a very important part of any relationship, certainly of romantic relationships. So if we communicate from the word go, and talk about things that are important for us, that we care about, that's preparing the groundwork for dealing better dealing with gridlocks. Another concept that is absolutely brilliant that David Schnarch introduces is the following. When many relationship experts are asked, what's the most important thing in a relationship, many would say, well, it's validation. It's validating your partner. Unconditional acceptance, is a phrase that's being thrown out a lot. And David Schnarch says that's not true. That, yeah, validation is important. It's nice, but he said even more important than validation is the following: it's knowing and being known. Knowing and being known. Because why? Because when you know your partner, when you are known by your partner, that is what intimacy is all about. So if we can, as a couple, learn to open up and become more and more intimate over time. In other words, stretch a little bit more in terms of opening up about our desires, our fantasies, our fears, our concerns. If we can open up about these things gradually, not all on the first date, because you will not have a second date if you do it, but gradually over time, then when the gridlock strikes, you're already close, you're already much more comfortable opening up, sharing, um, being authentic, being real, and hence getting through it. So this is one of the ways, this is one of the conditions that we can put in place, intimate conversations that can help us deal with any gridlock in any field, any area.
And if this is a totally new concept to a couple, how do they go about beginning that? Because, maybe somebody's listening to this and they're like, that's a good idea. But if this is a foreign concept to both of them, the other partner might be like, what's going on here? This isn't typical of you. Like how do we start to break down those walls in a healthy way?
Gradually, slowly, carefully. Um, you know, um, I'm not for as I said, going on a first date and then basically wearing your heart on your sleeve. Then it should take time. Today my wife knows things about me that she didn't know 20 years ago, and maybe 20 years ago, it will even be more. We'll be more open and more intimate. And that is the wonderful thing about relationships. Just like we can always become happier, we can always become more intimate. Um, and we need to be careful because intimacy is scary. If it wasn't scary, it wouldn't be intimate. So therefore, when we open up, when we take the first step, and we have to take responsibility for it, then we need to take small baby steps. And usually, when we take a small step in the intimacy direction, our partner will reciprocate. We have an innate mechanism that psychologists called they studied under equity theory, that we feel obliged to reciprocate when we're given something, whether it's something physical or spiritual, and or something immaterial. And when we show trust, when we give trust by opening up, by being a bit more intimate, by revealing something about ourselves, the our partner would often feel, again, this is natural, the need to open up a little bit as well.